Now we've come to the final song on the album, the final song and probably my favorite, just for the fact that it is probably the most honest, authentic, vulnerable recording that I've ever made. With the exception of me recording That's What Friends Are For at age 7, I think. That was definitely a vulnerable and authentic recording. Because I had just finished a production with this performing group that I was in called the Capitol Kids in Olympia, Washington. And I was an only child, so any time that something that I spent a lot of time doing would end, usually a show or a performing troupe or something of that nature, I was always very sad because then I would be lonely. I would go back to my only child life and miss, my theater playmates. We had gone up to Expo 86 in Vancouver, Canada for a vacation, and there was one of those little record the hits recording booth, and they had the karaoke tracks, and you would go in and choose your song and record it. And of course I chose That's What Friends Are For because that was the finale of our production. That was the closing number. We all came out and would hold hands and sing the song. So of course it reminded me of my performing troupe and my performing friends. So I sang it, and at the end of the recording, it's like I started to cry, and you hear my voice waver and get flat. You can hear that MP3 if you ever come to a live show and have the opportunity to purchase a USB, because it's on there in all its glory. Anyway, aside from that recording when I was 7 years old, I think I've always, since then, in most of my albums, am trying to achieve some level of perfection, or trying to achieve some level of impressing people, or, topping myself, or outdoing. I don't know, you name it. There's always a result or a purpose for the way that I record. And then with O'Farrell Street, it was intended imperfection. I was I'm releasing myself from this need to be perfect, and we're just going to have imperfect vocals like they did back in the day. And then with Shadows to Light, it was kind of a combo platter of both. And then now with this one, I wanted things to, again, be as authentic as possible. I didn't want to suck the heart out of any of the songs, but I wanted all of these vocals to attempt to be my best yet in a lot of different ways. However, with How Deep Is the Ocean, there was no intent for perfection. There was only an intention. In fact, I don't know what my original intention was. I think this song caught me by surprise. I can't even try to articulate an intention because there wasn't one. I think Dave and I didn't know. We knew there was going to be one just piano vocal only track on the record. We had thrown around a couple ideas. We thought about doing Can't Take That Away From Me. We talked about Funny Valentine. We talked about, I can't remember. And on the day, at the end of the day, when the rest of the band had left and it was just me, Dave, and the engineer in the booth, we were like, well, we have the studio all night, so we might as well take some time and run through a couple songs. We did How Deep Is the Ocean first. How Deep Is the Ocean is special to me because I remember it being on an Etta James album that my father and I wore out. Just my father and I, and then my grandmother and I just have this very special bond and connection through music and because of music. And Standards were my grandma's bag. So this song is all wrapped up in my family for me to start with. Add a layer to that, we're in this magical studio at East West Studios in Hollywood where Frank Sinatra recorded. And I know Frank Sinatra and love Frank Sinatra because of my grandmother. She loved Frank Sinatra. So you add that layer into this trifle that we're building. And then you add in the fact that Dave, who's playing piano, plays keys in the most magical way that reminds me of Bill Evans, that reminds me of the records I heard, growing up in my grandmother's house and at home at my house, the records my father would play. So you add in all this sentimental nostalgia and sort of divine perfection, if you will, for being where we were at that moment doing that. And I just was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by the day we had just had with these brilliant musicians, and that we were finally making the record, and that it was all coming together and actually working, and that we were pulling it off, and it was such a massive undertaking. There was a lot of factors at play, and I gave over, and we did it in one smooth take, but there were just tears streaming down my face, and in every break, where I had finished singing a line, and there's a little bit of piano, and I'm not singing for those couple of moments, my face was contorted, and I was like, I'll tell you no lies. How deep is he? So it was, I've never prided myself on being someone who can continue to sing through the sort of constriction that is crying, but somehow I got through the whole thing. You can hear, the the imperfections, the tired that my voice was after singing for, 8 hours straight. You can hear some of the shakiness and wavering for being so emotional singing this song. Then we can't take that away from me. And then we did Funny Valentine. We messed around in the studio for a while, but I knew in my gut, I'm like, nothing's going to top what that one magical take was. Now, keep in mind, David and I had never run this song before. We sang it through that one time. That was the one first, last, only, no, I think we did it a second time, but I had pulled myself together by then. And it just didn't have the same magic. But that first time we ran it, the first take that's on the album, we had never run that song together before. So there just was a lot of beautiful, magical things that had fallen into place to make it a magical moment. And so in my gut, while David was really excited about how Can't Take That Away From Me turned out, which would have been a lovely moment to have on there too. That's my favorite standard. That and Funny Valentine are my favorite standards. But I knew in my gut, like, there's just something magic that happened. I felt it. You felt it. We were here. That's the one, with all its imperfections, that has to be on the record because of the nostalgia and the magic, and because of the fact that, like, I feel like there's this perfection that we all strive for, especially now with social media and the way that we are able to present ourselves. I've talked about it in previous confessionals, but we're able to edit our photos. We're able to edit our vocals on an album. We're able to edit real life enough to being picture perfect or sonically perfect. And it's a really heavy burden to carry sometimes for anyone. I'm not speaking just of myself, but for anyone to carry the burden of, like, striving for or aiming for perfection. That ultimately is not, like, a real thing. It's an illusion. It doesn't exist anyway, And so I felt like it was important, not just for me to have that liberated moment of being like, here comes a really imperfect song on a record, but also to give other people permission to be imperfect. I watch other artists strive for perfection and beat themselves up when they miss it and not enjoy the moment and lose sight of what the art is meant to do, which is make people feel and think, to give you permission, if you will so take it, if you're comfortable enough. It took me years to get there, to give you permission to be imperfect, to be human, to feel what you feel and express it. It sounds silly to say. It sounds like it should just be something we naturally do. But more and more, I feel like this expectation is there. And if there's anything I can do to sort of invite you into being messy, let you know that it's okay. It's not only okay, but sometimes it's more attractive. I mean, not messy. I mean, chances are if you've been aiming for perfection and then you swing all the way to mess, you're gonna land somewhere in the middle. Don't get me wrong, I am still very much a perfectionist. I'm in the pursuit of perfection, or a recovering perfectionist, if you will. I aim for the best possible quality, but sometimes the best possible quality is flawed. My compass is led by my feelings. If it feels good, it's right. If it feels good in here, in my gut and in my heart, then it's right. If I start to take an astringent to these things to clean them up and it starts to feel like the life is being sucked out of it, I'm heading in the wrong direction. So anyway, I am so moved by the way Dave plays the piano in general, but this song in particular. There are magical moments in music making. That was quite an alliteration. Magical moments in music making. Marg. Magical moments in music making. Does it make it not alliteration if there's an in there? Magical music making moments. There it is. Magical music making moments where it becomes a conversation between two musicians or multiple musicians. You can't always find that lock. Sometimes someone's off or someone's not listening or someone doesn't want to listen or they get in their own thing. Sometimes it's not a conversation. If you're lucky and you're working with people who are all open and the channels are flowing and you're willing and open, it can be that kind of a conversation. All that to say, it was a conversation with Dave and I that day in that take that you can't practice and you can't plan. I'm moved every time I hear that song. And I'm so glad that we put it on the record. And I'm so proud of it. My hope for that song is that it honors the tradition and keeps standards alive, as well as gives permission people to be perfectly imperfect. How much do I love you? I'll tell you no lies. How deep is